The following podcast is brought to you by the Station of the Cross. Thank you for listening.
Change our home life. Change the way we educate our children.
It is the presence of God. He promised to leave. I will not leave you orphans.
Dear brothers and sisters, the Holy Spirit is with you.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment, that we might hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. While America was very busy yesterday, and that means that we're very busy here too at the Catholic Current, in our second segment, we're going to have a regularly scheduled guest, author and social critic Fiorella Nash, addressing the question, has radical feminism betrayed women? In our first segment, we welcome back the founder and president of the Lepanto Institute, Michael Hichborn. Michael, welcome again to the Catholic Current.
Thanks so much for having me back on, Father. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Michael, we'd like to get your take on what happened in the elections last night. What's the status of the different seats that we know so far? And then let's begin to talk about what this means for faithful Catholics.
Sure. So, as you know, last night I was with Church Militant covering live all the different races that were going on, most particularly the toss-up races, paying particular attention to what was going on with the Democrat pickups, the Democrat losses, and that kind of thing. And what we found, or what we witnessed last night, was that not only were the Republicans able to maintain control of the Senate, they actually wound up gaining several seats. There are still a couple of seats that are not being called at this point in time. So we're watching that very carefully too. But I think that the fact that the Republicans were able to maintain control of the Senate is huge. When you look at the House of Representatives side of things, the Democrats were able to gain control of the House with a few moderate pickups. I think that they were able to gain close to about 30 seats from what they had before. But when you look at the expense that the Democrats put into this campaign all across the board, you see that their pickups really are not this massive blue wave that they kept saying was going to happen. Not only did they not gain control of the Senate as they predicted and expected, but their gaining of control of the House of Representatives is by a fairly narrow margin, respectively speaking. When you look at
my understanding is that since the end of World War II, I think it's one of the we expect that the party that has the White House will lose seats in the midterm elections, especially in the House. And in recent times, we saw Obama lose over 60 seats. I think Clinton lose almost 50. So this is a relatively modest number. What does this mean for the country? Well, you've got the Congress split. You've got a non-trivial majority in the Senate and a razor-thin majority in the House. Do we have 2 years of gridlock to look forward to?
I don't think so. For one thing, with rumors of Justice Clarence Thomas saying that he may retire sometime in the near future, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg having a very difficult time even remaining awake during just a couple of hours worth of a presentation or some sort of ceremony, much less to say that she's not even staying awake during Supreme Court sessions. Her long-term viability in the Supreme Court is also greatly in question. So there is a possibility of 2 Supreme Court appointments by this president's administration, which means that control of the Senate is very, very important for moving forward in that regard. Not only that, but the Senate has the more important seats when it comes to putting forth legislation, or even some of the committees that they have. It's a more important position to hold. The control of the House is not insignificant, because whenever you pass a bill or try to get legislation passed, it has to be passed by both the House and the Senate.
Right.
But one of the things that we noted last night was that unless the one party or the other controls the Senate by a wide margin, the probability of crossover from the controlling party always increases, because now the controlling party, they're not going to vote necessarily as a block in lockstep. They're going to look for ways to cross the aisle in order to make deals so that they can get their legislation passed and so forth. You're not going to see as much crossing the aisle from the minority party. It never happens. They tend to vote in block. So the fact that the Democrats were not able to gain a wide margin of control in the House of Representatives is actually kind of a big deal, because it means that we may not see the gridlock that you normally see in the second half of most presidential administrations.
I was looking at some numbers recently, and they said that the Catholic vote split between the two parties almost evenly, 49%, 49%. That's a shift from recent voting patterns of Catholics in the United States, isn't it?
It sure is. When you look at the Catholic vote during the Obama administration, you saw, I think it was 56% of the Catholic vote went towards Obama. Mm-hmm. But now, with a 49-49 split, you're seeing almost a paradigm shift within the Catholic Church herself.
How do you account for that change?
Well, that's kind of hard to quantify. It could be, I think, actually, honestly, I think a lot of it had to do with some of the scandalous revelations over the summer. Catholics have become very disenfranchised with the problems that have erupted in the church, and the fact that prelates in the church are not willing to recognize that at the heart of the problem, it's a homosexual problem, not just a predatory problem. A lot of people are looking at the situation and saying, no, this is definitely a homosexual problem. Even those Catholics who were friendly towards the homosexual community are recognizing that the claim that it's not a homosexual problem is ridiculous. And I think that because the Democrats have become so far entrenched in pushing a homosexual agenda, even to the point of putting transgenders and open bisexuals in these campaigns, I think Catholics are waking up a little bit to the fact that, there really is a problem here, and we can't go down that road.
I also want to talk a little bit about some state referenda that were voted on. There was a significant pro-life referendum in West Virginia yesterday. How did that turn out?
That's correct. The West Virginia referendum sought to recognize in their constitution legal protections for preborn children, and it passed. Now, the implication here is huge, because with a referendum now in a state constitution to recognize legal protections for preborn children, obviously organizations like NARAL and Planned Parenthood aren't going to stand for this, and they're going to try and challenge it. But this is also why the night of the long knives came out for Brett Kavanaugh, because with him now being on the Supreme Court, taking over for the swing vote known as Justice Kennedy, right. You now have a strongly pro-life Supreme Court that could potentially be hearing a case now to recognize whether this is a constitutional amendment to the state constitution of West Virginia or not. And without having the activist judges that are going to be looking not just at the constitutional legality of it, but their own particular persuasion of agenda pushing, with them not being in control of the vote, I think that we may even have the very first state recognize legal constitutional protections for preborn children on a statewide level, and it could be upheld by the Supreme Court, which could also cause other states around the country to start a personhood movement, and it would be huge.
Well, I know that the state of Alabama also passed a referendum stating, in effect, that there is nothing in their state constitution that secures the so-called right to procure an abortion. So I think we are, for better or worse, living in interesting times, and we have to stay informed, and we have to stay prayerful. Michael Hichborn, president and founder of the Lepanto Institute, thank you for joining us on the Catholic Current for your valuable analysis. I hope we can have you on the air again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Father, and God bless you. God bless your audience.
Thank you. I'm Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to interview author and social critic Fiorella Nash, addressing the question, has radical feminism betrayed women? You don't want to miss it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Station of the Cross invites you to join us each day for the Liturgy of the Hours at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern. The Liturgy of the Hours is the daily prayer of the Church and is made up of readings from sacred scripture, writings from saints and theologians, and small reflections. For details about each hour and more information about the Liturgy of the Hours, visit thestationofthecross.com. We hope you'll join us for this daily prayer of the Church each day at 5 a.m., 3 p.m., and 9:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Station of the Cross.
This is Lavinia Spirito for Catholic Way Bible Study. The birth of the church is described in the account of Pentecost from the book of Acts. And suddenly a sound came from heaven like the rush of a mighty wind, and it filled the house where they were sitting. And there appeared to them tongues as of fire, distributed and resting on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. This is the same Holy Spirit presence of God that was so thick it barred entrance to the tent of meeting in the desert and overwhelmed Solomon's priests at the inauguration of the first temple. This very same Spirit gave the prophets their message and empowered great miracles. This same Spirit of power breathes through the very fabric of our lives. What will you allow Him to do through you today?
Catholic Way Bible Study. Peace, power, purpose. Find out more at cwbs.org.
At 3 weeks after conception, the baby's brain is dividing into 3 main parts. The circulatory system is fully functioning, and the baby's respiratory and digestive systems are forming. You were once this 3-week embryo developing in your mother's womb. Human life is sacred. Think about it. CoalitionForLife.com.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Each morning, the Catholic Current sends out a short survey on the topic for today's show so that you can share your thoughts and any questions you might have. This is a great way to participate, especially if you aren't able to call in live. A few of the responses will be read over the air to add to the discussion, so make sure you sign up to receive our emailed survey at thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTigg of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. If you're just tuning in, you should know that in the first portion of the program, we had Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute review the election results here in the United States. And now we're going to continue with our regularly scheduled guest. The topic that we're addressing today is this: is radical feminism betraying women? Our guest is an author, cultural critic, a researcher for the London-based Society for the Protection of Unborn Children, and her latest book is called The Abolition of Woman: How Radical Feminism is Betraying Women. Fiorella Nash, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you.
Fiorella, let's work out some terms and then make some distinctions. How would you understand feminism in general, radical feminism, and what is it about radical feminism that is unhelpful for women? Your book seems to be very critical of radical feminism. I'm almost inclined to say that radical feminism is something that dewomanizes women. Help us to understand what you mean, please.
Yes, I think when people think about feminism today, they are thinking of radical feminism. I think that is the strain of feminism that is dominant at the moment. That is very much the contemporary feminism. But feminism is a very broad movement, or at least it was. And the early feminists would have had a very different understanding of the struggle for equality and of their own identity than the feminists of today. So I'm quite keen to make that distinction between radical feminism and feminism more broadly, and the feminism of the first feminists, so that we're not just speaking of feminism generically, because I think radical feminism, which has its roots in the 60s, has become very negative, and it has very negative associations, particularly for those involved with the pro-life movement. It's associated with being very anti-family, anti-marriage, anti-motherhood, giving a very...
Not very fond of men, apparently, either.
Not very fond of men, and it's very, very antagonistic towards men. In fact, one of the complaints made is it's more about how awful men are than how good women are. I think for many women, in fact, it has been quite a turn-off. We think of women in pussy hats and whatever, which quite a few of us would really rather not be associated with. But that's not the whole story. And certainly for pro-life feminists such as myself, there is so much more to feminism. And the early feminists had a very different vision of woman that we're really trying to rediscover. If you look at the work, for example, of Feminists for Life of America, they hark right back to the early days of feminism, the world in which feminism first emerged, and the attitude that the first to the foremothers, if you like, of feminism had, particularly towards abortion, which they certainly did not see as liberating to women.
Right. In the United States, there are a pro-life women's group that call themselves, followers of Susan B. Anthony, and her writing, Susan B. Anthony, who's one of the founding mothers of the feminist movement in the United States, excoriated the practice of abortion and said that it was unworthy of women and absolved men of their responsibility for their actions. And it just seems to be assumed now that if you're going to be pro-woman in any way, so that at least a secular story goes, you have to be wildly enthusiastic about abortion and can't praise it or talk about it enough.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I'm most critical about in my book, is that abortion has become almost a totem that we have to bow down and worship. It's become like a sacred cow of modern feminism. And it's become beyond question. We're not allowed to say, well, hang on a second, what does abortion actually do to a woman? And why have we suddenly decided that it's a terribly liberating thing for women? The early feminists certainly would have seen abortion as exploitative, as a sign that society was failing women. We say the same. We say this is not liberating. A society that was truly just and where women were really respected would be a society without abortion. It is a way of getting men off the hook. It is a way of forcing women to choose between their careers and their motherhood, between their family and their social status and motherhood. it does terrible damage to women that is not being acknowledged. It is used as a weapon to hurt women in countries, for example, I talk a lot about China and coercive population control. It is actually a very, very negative thing for women, but we have got to the point where we're not even allowed to question it, but we must question it.
You use a phrase in your book regarding women who have regretted their abortions. You talked about disenfranchising their grief, that somehow it's hateful or dishonest or a betrayal of women to speak of your own abortion in anything but the most glowing terms. And there are websites in the United States where women are encouraged to talk about what a happy, lovely, cheerful outcome it was to have aborted their child. It strikes me as madness. You know, in the referendum recently in Ireland, I was appalled to see people crying tears of joy and literally dancing in the streets over the removal of constitutional protections for the unborn in Ireland. What is driving that unqualified enthusiasm for abortion and radical feminism today?
Well, I think it's there are many factors. I mean, the situation in Ireland was extremely distressing. Of course, we were very close to it here, and we saw that unravelling. And the sad thing was that the leaders of the campaign to save the Eighth Amendment in Ireland were young women. That was something that was not noted in the media.
No, this is the first I'm hearing of it.
Yes. You know, it was being very much fronted by young women, and yet it was the whole way it was portrayed in the media was that it was, you know, oppressive, old-fashioned men who probably were in favour of the Magdalene laundries up against young women who wanted to take control of their bodies. That was the narrative, and I think there are a number of factors that I mean, that was almost an extreme example of it. I think we have established a narrative which says that abortion is part of the liberation of women and the liberation of women's bodies, and that narrative is not permitted to be questioned. And the whole way the debate has been shut down, or attempts are being made to shut it down through no platforming at universities, for example, and the removal of pro-life women from feminist groups, has made it very much harder to challenge that. But there's also a willful ignorance about what abortion actually involves. One of the things I mentioned in my book is the misinformation that's put out about abortion. You know, if you actually told women in the waiting room precisely what would happen during the abortion procedure, you would get a very different response to saying, oh no, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. It's just a bundle of cells, it's a very easy procedure. You know, and the more we hide behind these euphemisms, the harder it is for people to really embrace the horror that abortion is. If people are confronted with it, like through this Gosnell movie that's just come out, you get a very different picture emerging.
And that movie about one of the most horrific practitioners of abortion in the United States, there's been media silence about that movie too. You know, when I taught medical ethics, I would tell the students, never ever talk about abortion in the abstract. Always have a woman with a name and a blood type carrying a child with a gender, and a doctor with a name and a history, and describe the instrument in his hand and what he's about to do with it. And I think we have to have a more vivid rather than imaginary approach to abortion. It seems to me that if feminism is concerned about the liberation of women's bodies, it would make more sense to arrange our society and our economy where women could become pregnant without having to apologize for it. And that would be a real liberation of women in a way where they wouldn't have to betray their own nature. What are your thoughts on that, Fio?
Yes, I think there is a need to be a lot more positive about motherhood. But I think one of the more disturbing things I'm noticing, just seeing the trends in terms of the way we look at motherhood, is that there is a very contradictory attitude towards motherhood. On the one hand, you have this huge celebration of motherhood, and maternity clothes which show off your bump. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Being pregnant is great. Ultrasound scans quite often being the first picture of your baby that you put on social media to announce your pregnancy. And let me tell you, the pro-abortion side hate that. Really hate that, because it's bringing the unborn into the conversation in a way that they don't like. And yet, on the other hand, you get this. One thing I've heard commented on is almost what they call the fetishization of motherhood, that we've created this dichotomy between the willing mother and the unwilling mother, the wanted baby and the unwanted baby. And if you want your baby, it's wonderful and you celebrate it, what a lovely baby. And if you don't want it, it's a nuisance, it's a mistake, you have to get rid of it. And the whole language we use is different for the wanted and the unwanted child. And that's not scientific, it's not ethical.
It's horrifying. When I was in Washington, I believe it was Washington, D.C. years ago, riding out in the subway, there were two advertisements that were supposedly going to prevent teen pregnancy. One showed a strapping young man holding a baby with his football equipment in the corner and said, John couldn't make the team because of a few extra pounds. And then there was a photograph of a young lady holding a baby sulking, and she's saying, it's like being grounded for 18 years. So the villain in that case is the unwanted child. So I think part of the liberation of women has to somehow include the defense of the innocence of a child, regardless of their status.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one thing I do talk about in the book is that there is more of an understanding now, because of technology, because of the development of ultrasound, that we are talking about a human life here. You know, when in the early days of the pro-life movement, there was an awful lot of talk about trying to remind people that we were talking about a life. No, it's not cells. Here's how we can tell it's a life from conception. Whereas now, there's a lot more acknowledgement by people on the pro-abortion side that they are ending a human life. It's quite frightening. They'll be a lot more open about the fact that they are doing that. And so we have to continue to speak about the humanity of the baby and why the baby has rights. But also we have to try to confront those negative images and arguments you've just mentioned, because we talk about motherhood as if it were a form of enslavement. You just talked about the girl sulking in the corner being grounded. And one thing I certainly would like to be able to say, I have 4 children, is that, they're not three babies like very long. Actually, I loved it when my children were at the baby phase, but a lot of women find that very challenging. They're human beings. They're people with whom you have a relationship for life, who give so much.
Right. The children are demanding, they're costly, they're a source of joy, and they're also creatures of God made in His image and likeness, and we have to arrange all of our lives around those wonderful facts. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Fiorella Nash. We're going to discuss the buying, selling, and discarding of women's bodies. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tune in weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern for Sermons for Everyday Living. There's no better way to start your day than with spiritual formation from inspiring priests. For details about upcoming episodes and for podcasts of past shows, visit thestationofthecross.com and click on Sermons for Everyday Living under the Programs tab. That's Sermons for Everyday Living, weekdays from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
This is the Pope Paul VI Institute Minute with Dr. Tom Hilgers.
Is the Catholic Church out of date? Is she irrelevant in her views on reproductive medicine? Since the introduction of the birth control pill in the 1960s, medical science on a whole has made little attempt to understand the fertility and menstrual cycles. Physicians and researchers remain satisfied with controlling or masking symptoms and problems with the oral contraceptive pill. Couples wanting to live according to church teachings on love and life struggle to do so effectively and joyfully. Could contraception ever be morally permissible? I wondered about this when I was a senior medical student. That is, until the 25th of July, 1968, when Pope Paul VI issued the letter Humanae Vitae. Until next time, I'm Dr. Tom Hilgers.
For a complimentary gift and more information on the Pope Paul VI Institute, log on to www.popepaul6, that's Roman numeral 6.com.
I might have gone to church, at Christmas time, gradually quit going. it's not as scary as I thought it was. It's a much more warm and open place, and God really is about love. It's not about the rules and the things that I remember as a young child. It really is about the love that God has for each one of us that's so deep and wonderful.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for any reason, visit CatholicsComeHome.org.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. If you miss any portion of today's show or want to listen to any past episodes, click the podcast link under the Programs tab at the top of our homepage, thestationofthecross.com.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. Earlier in the program, we had Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute to review the results of the midterm elections here in the United States. And then we've taken up a conversation now with Fiorella Nash, an author, cultural critic, a researcher for the London-based Society for the Protection of the Unborn, and author of the book, The Abolition of Woman, How Radical Feminism is Betraying Women. In this segment, we're going to look at what we might call the commodification of the female body. Fiorella, in the last segment we talked about how the issue of abortion really stands or falls on whether or not any given woman wants or doesn't want a child. Let's extend that conversation further and say that now we want a child, but we want a child on our own terms. So women are buying and selling gametes, and women are renting out or renting one another's wombs for children had through assisted reproductive technology. What's your take on that, and what is this doing to women, the outsourcing of their fertility?
I think this is one of the major scandals that the Western world is not facing up to. Commercial surrogacy is banned in many countries, in many Western countries throughout Europe and parts of the States, and it is banned for good reason. What you are getting are childless couples from the States, from Britain, from Canada and elsewhere, also gay couples who go to developing countries such as India to buy themselves a womb, to rent themselves a womb for 9 months. A surrogate will be paid for her trouble. She will spend 9 months carrying someone else's baby, and then within hours of giving birth, the baby will be taken away. She will never see it again, and she'll be paid, and that's the end of it. And it's a terrible form of exploitation. I feel it's a colonization of the female body, because I do feel there is a very strong colonial attitude at work here. I don't think we would accept our own people being placed in military-style dormitories for 9 months, separated from their families, forced to take endless pills and injections, being forced to abort against their will in some situations, having no say whatsoever over the future of the baby that they gestate for 9 months. I can't imagine that we would accept our own women going through these horrors, and yet we expect women in India and Nepal to be terribly pleased about it.
Well, it seems to me to be almost a form of animal husbandry, rather than treating human beings as the human beings that they are, dignified, made in the image and likeness of God. And I would note that this is primarily, poor women. These are not women who are brain surgeons who are agreeing to undergo these procedures. And I know in the United States, if a woman agrees to be a surrogate for another couple, there's usually a stipulation in the contract that if, say, in the first trimester, there is any sort of abnormalities or deficiencies detected, the woman must abort or assume financial responsibility for the child, because the child himself has become a product. And when you have a product that's made to order. You want to exercise quality control. And so not only is the woman being treated as a commodity, as an incubator, what is being incubated is also a product subject to quality control. This seems to be dehumanizing for everyone who's touched by it.
Yes, it's dehumanizing on every level, and there are some horrendous situations that I came across when I was doing my own research, which need further work and further research. For example, women being given abortion pills without their knowledge to abort a baby in these commercial surrogacy cases, and then being told that they've suffered a miscarriage, so they're not going to be paid the full fee.
Well, what about the rallying cry of my body, my choice? Unless someone with a better credit rating is involved and has rented you, then you just need to shut up and take your medicine literally.
Yeah, it is rank hypocrisy of the worst kind. It makes me so angry when I see American women dressing up in Handmaid's Tale bonnets, talking about this awful dystopian future they could have, when we have created the society of the Handmaid's Tale, but we have done it in other countries. They're not white Caucasian women like Offred in Margaret Atwood's book. They're poor women in shanty towns in developing countries. We are betraying the so-called sisterhood.
Right, and as long as we don't have to see them or look at them or know their name, then they're not human. And they're just vehicles. They're just instruments.
And we can create fantasy worlds in which they're actually benefiting from this. We can convince ourselves, like the colonials of old, that we're actually doing them a favour by not looking too closely at what's going on, not looking at the black market of babies that we're creating, not looking at what happens to these women after they give birth. Nobody is looking out for them. Nobody's looking out for their mental health, their physical health. We're being very careful to screen out the truth of what we are doing to women in the name, ironically, of women's rights.
Well, and having taught medical ethics for many years, I know that just at the physical level, it's always a tremendous risk for the women involved. For the woman who's donating her eggs, she has to be super ovulated chemically. There's all sorts of risks there that no one wants to talk about. In vitro fertilization is a low-yield procedure, so you implant a woman with 2, 3, or 4 embryos, and if there are multiple pregnancies, then the euphemism machine kicks into gear, and we're not aborting the unwanted children. We're undergoing selective pregnancy reduction. Why is there not a hue and cry among self-identified feminists against this utterly anti-human and anti-feminine phenomenon?
Well, of course, when it comes to selective abortion, the knee-jerk reaction is you just have to support abortion. However it happens, if it's sex-selective abortion, if it's baby girls getting killed, if it's coercive abortion, the knee-jerk reaction is always that you support it. It's one of the hypocrisies of the current discourse. But I think with IVF has been very good at dressing itself up as very pro-women, saving a couple, saving a woman from the pain of infertility, giving a woman the chance to have complete control of her body so she can give birth later if she wants, and all the rest, without looking at the health problems you have mentioned. The lack of longitudinal studies on the health of women is shocking. We are putting women through procedures without asking ourselves what is actually going to happen to them. And we're talking about healthy women being given procedures with unknown consequences. And there was a very devastating documentary some years ago called Exploitation. I don't know if you came across it. Yeah, which interviewed women whose health had been compromised. They were never told of the dangers of egg donation. They were never told. And of course, in developing countries, it's worse,
Right, I saw some of the documentary. I saw the whole documentary, and women were told, well, I'm just donating some building material that I'm not using right now, and then my boyfriend and I are going to have a wonderful exotic vacation, etc. And don't see the women who've had strokes or had lost their own fertility as a result of being carpet bombed by artificial chemicals, etc., etc. And this just becomes a mystery to me. I mean, simply putting aside the moral issue, the spiritual issue, the social economic issue, just on a utilitarian basis of the medical issue alone, this is such a monstrous act against a woman's body. Why the conspiracy of silence, not only from women who claim to be feminists, but also the doctors who are supposed to care about women's health? This can't happen without collusion. Have you found any reason, have you given any thought to why the conspiracy of silence?
My feeling is it's twofold. I think one is that IVF, it's now 40 years old, sold itself very well to the media. You had, the sob stories of infertile couples with their lovely baby, and, they were able to give very positive images, which I think have stuck in the consciousness to the extent that most people don't even realize there is any controversy surrounding IVF or artificial reproductive technologies. But also, you follow the money.
Right.
That's what as a writer, you always follow the money. And the fertility industry is hugely lucrative. It's a multi-million-dollar industry, and that a lot of people have a lot to profit from it.
Right.
I mean, the ironic thing is, sorry, carry on.
No, there's a lot of money involved, and you have people who are, because they're in an emotionally charged state, dealing with the truly agonizing struggles involving infertility. And I've worked with infertile couples, and it is a terrible soul-sifting cross. And so now someone whispers, "We can fix all this. You just have to take out your credit card and we can make your pain go away." That's incredibly seductive. And at least in the United States, the industry is largely unregulated, so it's kind of the Wild West aspect of medicine as well. So when you've got people who are emotionally vulnerable and have access to means, it seems lots of people are going to line up and exploit them. And I'm wondering, where are all these bold advocates for the voiceless? In light of what your research has discovered, have you gotten any pushback? Has anyone said Fiorella Nash is Chicken Little? She's a fraud. She's making things up. What has been the response to what you've been writing over the years?
I've had a lot of people obviously challenge what I'm saying. I expect people to challenge me. That's part of the deal. What I have found more concerning, in fact, is not so much people pushing back and saying, "No, you can't say that," or "Where's your evidence for that?" because I can deal with that. Mm-hmm. What I am finding is the no platforming issue is making it harder for me to get the message out in person. I used to do university lectures all the time. It was most of what I did. I now find it much, much harder to get into universities because there's so much suspicion. And, I'll get, if I am giving a talk at university, there'll be some inflammatory article about me in the student rag the week before I've even got there. So people will have their formed opinions. But if I can actually get there and people do listen to me and we do talk about it, you can have some positive experiences there. You can actually hammer out ideas. There is still some space for that, but I think, unfortunately, with the whole safe space ideology that's creeping into the university environment, it's getting harder to have those conversations. That's part of the reason I wrote the book, because short of burning the thing, it's harder to censor a book. Right. Unless you're going to have public book burnings and tossed on the flames, it's much harder to control what people write.
Well, we're not there just yet. How about in social media? Do you get pushback in social media?
Yes, I do. When I have articles out, you get things in the com boxes from both sides, in fact, from people obviously who regard the idea of pro-life feminism as fraud, as, masquerading as feminism, they'll sometimes say, but also from the other side saying, feminism is evil, you shouldn't be involving yourself with this at all. So there's a fair amount of commentary, but I wrote the book to ask a question and to provoke a debate, so it's all to the good.
Well, I know that I'm very concerned when we, in the United States at least, there's, YouTube and Twitter and so on and Facebook seem to be on the alert for so-called hate speech and community standards and so on, but they're very, very selective about what qualifies as hate. And very often it's the pro-life voices and the rational voices who want to have intelligent debate who are silenced, who are pushed aside, or who are denounced as haters in some way. And we have to be alert to that. Happily, we have the Station of the Cross and we have the Catholic Current to continue with intelligent conversations. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Fiorella Nash and address the issue of how we can help women to find out what they truly want and need. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This Divine Mercy Reflection is from the Diary of St. Maria Faustina. Humility is a virtue of great power and peace. St. Faustina speaks often of this virtue. In paragraph 593, St. Faustina writes, "O my Jesus, nothing is better for the soul than humiliations. And contempt is the secret of happiness, when the soul recognizes that of itself it is only wretchedness and nothingness, and that whatever it possesses of good is a gift of God. This is what sustains it. If there is a truly happy soul upon earth, it can only be a truly humble soul. A humble soul does not trust itself, but places all its confidence in God. God defends the humble soul, and the soul abides in unsurpassed happiness, which no one can comprehend. When we grow in humility, we trust less in our own ability and allow God to participate more fully in our lives. This will bring us peace and happiness that comes only from God." This Divine Mercy Reflection is brought to you by the Station of the Cross.
A map in a mirror. That's how we can view the life and legacy of Archbishop Fulton Sheen. We can look to Archbishop Sheen's faithful witness to the Lord as a guide, helping us to better share our faith with others. And we can hold up our own faithful witness to the Lord, asking how our lives might better reflect Jesus to a world so in need of Him.
My name is Miriam Chen. I come to work in the propagation of faith in 1964. And Bishop Sheen was the most holy man I ever know. He was all very kind, generous to people too.
I do not want to spend much time on thanking for gifts. I would concentrate on the gifts rather than the giver. I do not base my salvation on anything I've done. I base it on the fact that when I go before our Lord, He will say, "I heard my mother speak."
To find out more about the faithful witness of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, visit fultonsheenmission.org.
You're listening to the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network. Call in to the Catholic Current this hour at 1-877-511-5483. Shortly after the show, visit our page for the Catholic Current at thestationofthecross.com. You'll find a link to today's episode page where you can view Father McTague's show resources and today's podcast.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we plug into the power of Jesus Christ and His Catholic Church. You're listening to us on the Station of the Cross Catholic Radio Network and the iCatholic Radio app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. If you're just joining us, you should know that at the top of the hour, we began the program with Michael Hichborn of the Lepanto Institute discussing the outcome of the midterm elections here in the United States. And then we picked up our conversation with Fiorella Nash, a researcher, author, cultural critic. She does research for the London-based Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. We're looking at her latest book called The Abolition of Woman, How Radical Feminism is Betraying Women. And we've looked at how the cult of abortion and contraception leads to the commodification of women's bodies and harms everyone in the process. In this segment, we're going to try to take a lighter touch and ask about how we can help women to find out what it is that women really want and really need. Fiorella, I think we can agree that radical feminism as practice is doing a woman a profound disservice. If it were up to you, what would your account be of how women can be best benefited by women who want to be truly pro-woman?
Well, I think that's a huge subject, but I would start off by saying, if I were talking, well, I have two daughters, for example. If I were talking to my daughters about how to become the women they want to be, I would start by saying to them, question the messages you are being given by society. if you're told a woman's right to choose, what does that really mean? A woman's right to choose what?
Yes.
You know, I would ask them, don't spout the jargon. Look beyond that. Ask yourself, what is it you really want as a woman? Not what this person says you should want. Don't go with the crowd. We were always told that as children. Don't go with the crowd. Don't walk over the cliff with the other sheep.
Right.
Stop and think, what is it you really want? Because I think one of the insidious things about the society we're living in is that we keep telling girls, you're free, you're liberated, we want to liberate you. But actually they're not being liberated. They are simply being given a vision of womanhood that they are expected to follow. But because of the way it's phrased in a very libertarian way, they're not given as much of a reason, if you like, to question it. So the first thing I would say is, you just question that. You just
I agree with you. When I taught rhetoric, I would say, euphemisms are never your friend. And using pretty language to hide ugly realities doesn't serve anyone well. So start with questioning the language, questioning the message, and maybe also looking at, is the messenger happy? I mean, Fiorella, when you look around you, do you see self-described radical feminists who seem to be content, at peace, full of joy, looking forward to the next day?
No. And that was a fairly major reason why I questioned it to begin with. I used the term ugly to describe the sort of feminism I came across at university. These were young women. And they were not at peace, they were not happy, they were not fulfilled. But they were clearly searching for something. They were searching for some kind of fulfillment. And it's a very interesting observation you've just made, because I think when you're young and you're trying to find your feet and you're trying to find your place in the world, it's very difficult to look beyond the messages society are giving you, but also to look beyond the here and now. And yes. I would certainly say to a young woman, okay, you're 20, so being single and a career woman and all the rest is very attractive now. Will you still feel that way in 20 years' time? Mm-hmm. Will you feel that way in 40 years' time? Do you want to spend your life alone? Do you want to be completely focused on a career that may not even seem that important by the time you reach your retirement? Is there any way that you could get more balance in your life? That you could find a more enriching path? Because I firmly believe I'm university educated and I have a career that I love as an activist, as a writer, but my family are my life. And I would never have thought that when I was 18.
Right.
That I never would have believed or understood, because the messages about motherhood we got were so negative. I mean, we were told at school not to get married. We were actually told, that marriage was a terribly depressing and oppressive way to live. That's not the way to go about your life. Nothing has been more important in my life than raising my children. I can honestly say that with any sentimentality at all. I will never have as much responsibility. I will never be loved by my job or by my colleagues the way I'm loved by my children. That bond, that friendship, that relationship is so important. I can't see how a happy marriage is oppressive. One of the things that, bits of rhetoric you keep coming across is marriage is a form of prostitution. Really?
Right.
Marry a good man and he will support you. You will be a supportive partnership and you will bless one another and get one another to heaven, hopefully. And, you will be a constructive team within society, raising a family, keeping a roof over your head. We've got to somehow try to help the new generation of women just to break through those negative stereotypes and to find out the truth and to find out the path that they are being led down.
Fiorella, in your work, where does faith fit in? How does that shape your vision, and how does that give you the energy to keep on in the struggle?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I see the pro-life movement as a human rights movement, as much as I would see it if I were campaigning for refugees or if I were campaigning to end poverty. I've always seen it first and foremost as a human rights movement, and I'm very aware of people from all faiths and none who were involved with it. Personally, for me, I think I am very aware that it is a spiritual battle. I'm very aware of that side of it. And I think I would find it very hard to do my work if it was not for the faith and if it was not for that belief that we're not alone and that we are in possession of the truth. I think that it's such a huge motivation. And that's the side, I think, of the faith that maybe people from the outside don't see, is that we grow up with such a strong sense that, we are here for a definite purpose. Being a British Catholic, I grew up with the tradition of John Henry Newman. God has made me for a definite purpose. He's not made me for nothing.
Right.
And that, we have a contribution to make to the world. And that's a huge source of motivation for me and for, I think, certainly many Catholic campaigners, is that search. So, we have to leave the world a better place. It's not about what we can take from the world. It's what we can give it. I think it's hugely important.
In your work on behalf of women and the unborn, what kind of support would you like to have from the public face of the Church?
I think there's already a lot of support there, for which I'm very grateful. The crisis pregnancy centres, the sidewalk counselling, all of that side. I think I would love if I could design, as it were, a way forward, a blueprint forward. I would love to see more practical help available for women who are mothers, not just when they're pregnant, but when they are looking after babies, when they're looking after toddlers. I think with the disintegration of the extended family network and indeed the family unit altogether, and people quite often living very far from their families, there's a need for parishes, I think, to really embrace women and families, really be there for them.
Right, I agree with you. There was a time when you can count on your nearby mother and female relatives and grandparents and so on. That's not always the case now, so we have to be alert to the needs of those who could otherwise be vulnerable or exploited or have tragic regrets. Our guest today has been Fiorella Nash, author of the book The Abolition of Woman, How Radical Feminism is Betraying Women. I'm Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current. Look for my column today at aleteia.org, aleteia.org. Tune in Monday through Friday, 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern for the Catholic Current. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God our Lord protect you from all harm and from every evil until you reach the happiness of heaven. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, go in peace. Please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Station of the Cross. The Station of the Cross is a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please consider making a donation. Donations can be made through our website, thestationofthecross.com, or by calling 1-877-888-6279. You can also donate right through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. Thank you for listening to and supporting the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.